Good evening. Unit number 4, Theories of Truth and Error, Western Objectives. To familiarize the students with the four main theories of truth from Eastern and Western perspectives, to encourage them to question the sources of truth and error in knowledge. Introduction. How do I know? Can I be sure of the various ways of acquiring knowledge? How is error related to truth? In this unit, we see mainly the different classical theories of truth and reflect on them philosophically. We take only four main theories of truth as given in Western philosophy and give a critical account of them, where we introduce some related Indian concepts too. The correspondence theory. This theory says that truth is the adequation of the mind to the object. In other words, truth is the correspondence itself between what I affirm or deny to what is really the case. This has been our provisional understanding of truth. The majority of Indian schools of philosophy agree that Brahma knowledge must correspond to what really the object of knowledge is in itself. Some, however, raise the question: how can I know that what I can affirm or deny really corresponds to what the case is? In other words, how can I know that the object as known corresponds to the object as it is in itself? For if I had to turn my attention to this very correspondence, I would still know it as known, but would it in its turn correspond to what it is in itself, and so on and so forth ad in infinitum. I cannot jump out of my mind, as it were, so as to be able to compare what I know and the object of my knowledge as it is in itself, and thus to see whether they correspond to each other or not. Kant holds that we do not need to worry, uh, since we can never know the object as it is in itself. Noumen, for this remains always known and unknowable. We can only know the object as known phenomenon, as it appears to you and molded by certain forms of your mind categories. The scholastics say, "Don't worry, you do know the object as it is in itself." In fact, the object as known is really a kind of sign in which signum quo, not the image of the object as it is in itself is known, but directly the object itself. On this particular topic, the Indian schools of philosophy are also divided. Two main trends appear. One say that truth is self-validating, swatah pramanyavad. The other says that truth has to be validated by something other than itself. Partah Pramanyavad. We do not intend to enter into the detail of these two trends. The former is best represented by Sankhya, Mimamsa and Vedant, the latter by the Nyaya Vaisesik. But the way we understand correspondence is to see in it the definition of what we mean by truth, and not as some modern commentators of Nyaya, for example, as the test of truth. We make use of the test or proof to see whether the judgment or propositions is true or false. If I manage to obtain sufficient and necessary evidence, then I know that the judgment is true. Otherwise, I may either still be doubtful, or if the evidence is sufficient and necessary, that my judgment is false. I know that it is false. But then, supposing that I know fully know that my judgment is true, I do not need to have test the already established truth of my judgment by some other non-cognitive means. By its usefulness, if I do still feel the need to have further test, it means that I am still doubtful about whether my judgment is true or false. And if I simply want to show why, not whether my judgment is true, then I have to initiate a process of reasoning which I can come to see finally rest on not on any non-cognitive consideration usefulness but on some self-evident truth. Still some fail to disentangle themselves from the difficulty regarding the possibility of ascertaining whether the correspondence is itself true or false, or simply whether it is true at all. For it may happen that I may not be able to see that it is false, and yet I may not be able to see that it is true either. So they seek to find some other meaning of truth. The epistemological difficulty leads them to solve the semantic question differently. Notice already the two semantic and metaphysical question getting involved with each other. The pragmatic theory, the pragmatism from Greek pragma, deed is that doctrine or trend of thought according to which the value of an assertion lies solely in its practical bearing upon human interest. In this sense, it can also be called utilitarianism from Latin utilis, useful. So concretely, suppose I ask whether it is true that fire heats, the pragmatist would answer, well, if you put water or food on it, will it heat or not? The answer is definitely yes. So according to the pragmatist, all you need to know to see whether what you are saying is true or false is whether it serves you a good purpose. If it does, it is true. If it does not, it is useful. Or more precisely still, the question whether fire heats corresponds to objective facts, or it is either considered as impossible to ascertain or as useless. At first sight, this may seem a very attractive and practical idea. If universally applied, it can does have disastrous consequences not only in the realm of philosophy but and especially in that of religion, as we are going to see. Still, a lot can be learned from such a trend of thought. In the best known for pursuing such a trend of thought are C.S. Spires, the father of modern pragmatism and the coiner of the term. J. Dewey, calling his philosophy instrumentalism, and William James C.S. Spires, a scientist and logician, applied his theory mostly to scientific assertions and also ethics. If a proposition yields results in the field of scientific inquiry and as such is accepted by the scientific community, that proposition is true. J. Dewey applies his doctrine not only to scientific assertions and thus to the formation of a scientific theory, but also to all assertions we use in the solution of everyday problems. If our solutions are useful and if our theories by which we try to reconstruct the ever-changing flow of life are verified by life itself, our solutions and theories can be called true. William James speaks more in terms of meaning and view of life. If an assertion and a view of life which is thus made up of such assertions function satisfactorily in my life, if in other words it gives meaning and purpose to my life, then that assertion and view of life are true. Of course, they may be true to me and not to you. James applies this also to religious propositions expressive of religious beliefs, and in this he is followed by other more recent thinkers of whom we shall speak later in a related but different context. A lot can be learned from an epistemological pragmatic approach to truth. We can speak of the value of a working hypothesis in scientific inquiry. Not only that, but as we point out two of the set of hypotheses which make up a theory, and this too in religious knowledge. One cannot really ask whether they are true or false, but whether they are appropriate or inappropriate, arbitrary or well grounded, reasonable or not. Tell, of course, reasons ultimately founded on some self evident truth do not provide sufficient evidence to prove them true or false. They are to be considered true in this pragmatic sense. Truth is here understood rightly as usefulness. Reality, after all, from the smallest atom to the highest God, is so mysterious, at times so puzzling, that we have to be humble enough to admit that in most things we know things only in so far as we can and in accordance with our limited capacity of known. This approach, far from being a skeptic one, or purely a subjectivistic one, equips one with a certain of oneness to ever present but ever uh, eluding truth. As Saint Augustine says, "We look to find, we find to look again." Much of our knowledge of reality is a construction of it in such a way as to make it intelligible to us, but in such a way too that remains always provisional, hypothetical. And this is particularly true when from the level of facts we pass on the level of their significance. That there is a somebody in front of me is a fact, and it is a fact too that she is of such and such description. But is it a fact that she is the most beautiful girl in the world? Is this a proportional judgment subject to be proved true or false? If not, it is not true to anybody, including to her passionate lover. If it is true to him, what is meant by true here? Does it not mean significant? Take such other judgments. My work is my life. My family is my world. Love is my breath. Humanity is a community. History has a purpose. Good and evil are in perfect harmony. God is a loving father. What is true here and what is false? Further still, what does it profit a man to know all there is to know if finally all his knowledge serves him for nothing? Lest of all to be or become what he is supposed to be or become. Can I really call the true, genuine, worthwhile knowledge? If not, what is then knowledge? Is it not that purposeful knowledge, that knowledge which alone can serve him truly to achieve his final destiny? And what is the meaning here is here what is the meaning here of true and truly? It is not that knowledge which serves no useful purpose, which does not or cannot result into a fruitful activity, is sterile knowledge. And if it is, can it still be called true knowledge? All this is, of course, is true and profoundly so. We shall return to these questions later when we shall deal with language and its functions, especially religious language. But from the epistemological standpoint, the pragmatic theory of truth needs, according to us, to be severely qualified. Firstly, scientific knowledge and scientific truth cannot, without much further ado, be taken to be the paradigm of knowledge and truth in general. To do so would presuppose certain presuppositions which would be themselves subject to non-scientific proof, and hence to a non-pragmatic concept of knowledge and truth. Secondly, from a semantic point of view, it would be arbitrary to define truth stipulately, since there is a conventional everyday meaning of the term. All one could say is that in such and such field of knowledge, or in any kind of hypothesis, it would be inappropriate to speak of truth, but of something else, something which we did ourselves, or that in such a case one cannot come to know the truth at all. Thirdly, from the religious point of view, belief, no matter how significant it is or should be, would lose all its religious value and therefore its significance. Finally, scientific knowledge and scientific truth cannot. All this is, of course, is true and profoundly so. We shall return to these questions later when we shall deal with language and its functions, especially religious language. But from the epistemological standpoint, the pragmatic theory of needs, according to us, to be severely qualified. Firstly, scientific knowledge and scientific truth cannot, without much further ado, be taken to be the to be the paradigm of knowledge and truth in general. To do so would presuppose certain presuppositions which would be themselves subject to non-scientific proof, and hence to a non-pragmatic concept of knowledge and truth. Secondly, from a semantic point of view, it would be arbitrary to define truth stipulatively, since there is a conventional, yes, everyday meaning of the term. All one all one could say is that in such and such field of knowledge, or in any kind of hypothesis, it would be inappropriate to speak of truth, but of something else, something which we did ourselves, or that in such a case one cannot come to know the truth at all. Thirdly, from a religious point of view, belief, no matter how significant it is or should be, would lose all its religious value, and therefore its significance, if it could be shown to rest on no real foundation, with a basis in reality. A false conviction may still be significant to somebody, but this does not make it true. Fourthly, to say that truth is relative, known only progressively and in accordance with the capacity and interpretation of the knower, and as significant to him or not, shows only that one has to distinguish between different fields of knowledge, different functions of knowledge, different levels of understanding, and different kinds of elocutions. Relativism, which says that no objective truth can be known to all and therefore is no sense at all. Can one say to be absolutely certain about anything? Can be shown to be like skepticism, evidently self-contradictory. And the coherence theory, because of the difficulty we discussed with regard to the correspondence theory, some interpret truth as coherence between a proposition and other well established true propositions, if it can be shown that this proposition does not contradict these well established prepositions, then it can be called true. As is clear, this theory presupposes that before we start asking ourselves whether a preposition is true, we would have already agreed explicitly or implicitly, or on certain other prepositions as being true. For example, we ask ourselves whether the preposition abortion is murder is true or false. We shall have first to agree on whether the following prepositions are also true or false, namely, to kill a person unnecessarily is murder, the unborn child is a person, abortion is to kill a person unnecessarily. Now, supposedly that we agree that these prepositions are true, it follows that our original prepositions can be seen to be true. In other words, it is logically implied by, not in conflict with, coherence with the previously agreed upon truths. In its simplest form, this theory equates truth with logical positivism, as could be expected. Logical positivism about which we shall be speaking later, renounces all idea of truth as correspondence with facts and interprets it as a correspondence or coherence with presuppositions themselves, or to put it differently, for it the facts are the propositions themselves. But in its more radical form, this theory is the epistemological aspect of that more general theory according to which the laws of thought not only are the laws of being itself in the sense that they correspond to them, but are the laws of being in the sense that they are their origin. So the primacy is given not to being over thought, but to thought with a capital T over all beings. And if thought is essentially consistent, then if one could work out a logically consistent view of reality, this must necessarily reflect reality as it is in fact, and a given proposition or judgment. If it coheres with this whole logically consistent view of reality is true, otherwise false. Idealism that of Spinoza, Hegel in the West, to a certain extent that of Shankara in India. Here again we have a lot to learn from this theory. When a judgment is expressed in a proposition which is made up of concepts, notions, etc., it is expressed in fact in a particular linguistic field, where not only the truth of the propositions but also the meaning of the concepts themselves are mutually related, and there are more than one linguistic field, as it is sometimes called, universe of discourse, such as the scientific, the atheistic, the legal, the economical, the moral, the religious, etc. For example, the proposition human being is composed of body and soul may be true in a scholastic, philosophical, linguistic field, where human being composed is body and soul have a specific meaning, and the truth of the judgment depends on the truth of many other related judgments. Like being is composed of matter and form, spiritual acts cannot intrinsically depend on matter, etc., but that same proposition may be either false or at least unintelligible in another linguistic field, as in Sankhya or in materialism, etc. A proposition is an Euclidean geometrical linguistic field, may be false or unintelligible in a non-Euclidean one. A logical proposition in a two-valued logical linguistic field may be false in a three-valued logical one, etc. In philosophy of religion, we take pains to show how a religious tenet, Christ is the Son of God in Christianity, or Atman is Brahman in Vedanta, can either be made intangible and much less said to be true or false, except within the whole context of its respective religious tradition, which is as it were its matrix. Hence, the meaninglessness of trying to understand a text out of its context. Hence, too, the misunderstanding which can arise if one try to compare the contrast different philosophical, religious, etc. opinions, beliefs, doctrines before one has made sure that one has first understood each and its respective linguistic field. All this is therefore very true. Still, does logical coherence enough to say that something is true in the generally accepted meaning of the term. We have already remarked that to give a stipulative definition to an already conventionally agreed upon meaning of a term is arbitrary. But apart from this semantic question, it is clear that proponents of the logical coherence theory of truth are led to such a definitions of theirs because of the epistemological difficulty we discussed with regard to the correspondence theory. More directly still, one could point out that this theory does not solve this same difficulty, for its presupposition that before we start asking whether a proposition is true or not, we have to have already agreed to consider other propositions as true, requires that we would have already settled the logical coherence of each of these latter propositions. With still that propositions, the infinite regress would be required here too, and it would be no answer to say that a matter of fact we inherit the truth of these prepositions from society. The question prepositions with still other prepositions, the infinite regress would be required here too, and it would be no answer to say that a matter of fact we inherit the truth of these propositions from form society. The question here is not how in fact we come to know from the time to our childhood up, but how we can philosophically understand truth. Recall that we too required self-consistency and coherence in any good, appropriate hypothesis, but we added to that precisely because as such as hypothesis remains a hypothesis, it would be out of place to ask whether it is true or false, or in other words, we did not consider hypothesis as such, in spite of its logical self-consistency and coherence, necessarily true. So, while true can in the formal sciences, logic, mathematics, be considered to be the equivalent of logical consistent, precisely because formal sciences by their very nature do not refer to any scientific object, fact, state of affairs. It cannot be so considered elsewhere. So can we at least agree that if a whole system of philosophical understanding of reality of prepositions is in fact self-consistent and coherent, it does mirror it as idealism behaves. The difficulty here is that it is not possible to imagine two perfectly self-consistent and coherent systems of this sort which are not compatible among themselves, or even contradictory to one another. In this case, when we have two or even more such systems, the question arises which of them is one to call true, supposing that in virtue of the principle of contradiction they cannot be called true. There could be many answers to this question. One could, for example, say that on further analysis, one can always discern in what one had at first sight mistaken to be a perfectly self-consistent and coherent theory, inconsistencies in such a way that one would finally realize that there can be only one logically self-consistent and coherent view of reality. Or one could answer, reality can in fact be mirrored in two or more such systems, provided that they are perfectly self-consistent and coherent, even though they are not compatible but not contradictory. Again, one could answer that what seems to be contradictory on a logical, epistemological level need not be contradictory on the metalogical, trans-empirical level. The level of reality as a whole is a whole in its ultimate causes, etc. All this would be interesting to discuss, as we do in philosophy of religion, but it is clear that ultimately on the epistemological level, if a self-consistent and coherent view of reality is to be said to be true, whether or not it is the only possible one or not, it is not just because it is so, but because it would have been shown to correspond to what the case is, as to the nature and structure etc. of reality itself. The performative theory. To understand this theory, we must go back to what we said about elocution. We recall that these are kinds of speech acts which we do perform when we say something. Now, when I say, for example, it is true that the world is round, do do I do anything more than what I say? The world is round. According to some, I am certainly not giving any more information about the world in the first case than in the second. All I am doing more when I add it is true. True that is adding impressive style or indication as to the position the statement has in the whole of my argument. Others, however, are not slow in remarking that this is a confusion between a first order assertion. In our case, the world is round, where something is said or stated about the world, and a second order assertion. In our case, it is true that the world is round, whether something is said or stated about the whole proposition as a whole, namely, the world is round. Now, some philosophers like P.F. Strawson, while pointing out that true or false occur only in a second order assertion, see in the use of the term true a sign of the speaker's affirmation, and in the use of the term false of his denial. Thus, to keep to our example, when I say it is true that the world is round, that the world is round is true. When I am doing is indicating that I agree, believe, am convinced, concede, affirm that the world is round. Hence, the performative function of the term true and correspondingly of the term false. The distinction between first order assertions and second order assertions is useful and well made. In logic, we speak of the distinction between first intentions and second intentions, but that was with regard to concepts. As a second intention, concept is a concept of a concept. So, to a second order assertion is an assertion of an assertion. In the world is round, the logical term of the proposition serving as its subject, that the what something is said about is the world in the proposition, that the world is round is true. The logical term is not the world but the whole proposition. The world is round, something is said about this whole proposition, and what is said is that it corresponds to what the case is. Now, it is undoubtedly true that when I say it is true that the world is round, I am doing something more than giving information about the world. I am doing something more, namely, I am indicating that I too believe, affirm, agree, etc. that the world is round. It would make no sense to say it is true that the world is round, but I do not believe it, or am not convinced of it. If I was not convinced of it, it would not say that it is true in the first place. Not only are the two propositions not identical, but their elocutory load is different. Whereas the world is round has one elocution, a constative. It is true that the world is round has two, the the constative and the expressive, the former affirming something about the world, the latter expressing some attitudes, in this case of belief, agreement, conviction, etc. of the one who affirms. It is only of constatives that the question of truth arises, as we have seen. So, by reducing a constative to an expressive is neither logically nor epistemologically sound, and the question of truth remains unsolved. Other authors A.J. Ayer similarly reduces moral propositions. Abortion is murder. Aesthetic propositions. This girl is beautiful. In these religious propositions, the good God exists. To mere expressive, we shall return to him later. But the same criticism could be addressed to him as the one we are addressing to the performative theory of truth in general. Still, one big lesson we could learn from it is that even in religious language, prepositions do often have a big expressive elocutionary load and not simply constitutive. When I say, for example, God is a loving father, I am not simply making a statement of fact or of an alleged fact, but I am expressing some attitude or attitudes of mind. Truth and error. When one discusses truth, one cannot help mentioning falsehood is the opposite of truth in all senses, ontological, moral, and logical. If in the logical or epistemological sense, truth is the correspondence between what is affirmed or denied to what the case. Falsehood is the same sense in the non-correspondence between the two. If a true judgment or proposition is that which corresponds to what the case is, a false judgment or proposition is that which does not, etc. Or if the truth lies, strictly speaking, in the judgment, as we have said, so does falsehood. Now, when I pass a true judgment, I am right. When I pass a false judgment, I am wrong. In the latter case, I commit an error, I am mistaken. The very possibility of perceptual error could at least partially account for the many trends in Western philosophy which sought to base knowledge, or at least to finally explain it, on purely rational ground and not on sense perception. We already have had the occasion to touch on this point in a different context when we refer to rationalism and the fundamental role of reason in the reconstruction of the objects of perception. But in this particular context, we wish to refer to all kinds of trend of thought in Western philosophy, which in a kind of idealist way sought to base knowledge or a perception of universal and abiding ideas like Plato, or on some absolutely sure and indubitable, clear and distinct ideas like Descartes, or in a different sense on the a priori forms of the mind itself like Kant, etc. All of these distrusting the reliability of sense perception because of the possibility of perceptual error and the ever shifting nature of our knowledge based on sense objects and perception, looked for a surer footing for knowledge, seeing that the formal sciences do not depend on sense perception for their truth and justification. Spinoza tried to build up his whole philosophy in the manner of geometry, starting with axioms and definitions and proceeding with theorems. And modern logical positivists do not hesitate to take mathematics as the paradigm of all knowledge. Speaking of sense perception, no matter how perceptual error is to be explained, it is to be noted that if we can speak of perceptual error at all, if we somehow or other can come to detect it and show that it is an error, it is because paradoxically enough sense perception is fundamentally reliable. In English, however, by error we do not mean perceptual error alone. We can commit errors, be mistaken in drawing false conclusions from given data, in inference, in believing unreliable witness, etc. But here again, if we can speak at all of Error at all, it is because of our capacity for truth. The primary datum, then whether in perception or in any other way of coming to know, is our capacity for the truth. But the ever groping mind for the truth, the wonder and mysteriousness of reality, and the admittedly limited means to attain it, the spatio temporal conditionings and his historicity of human beings, the physical and psychological barriers, disease of senses, weariness and laziness, bias and prejudice, inadvertence and non-chalency etc. remains always subject to error, but also and at the same time capable of recognizing the error and overcome it. But this means too that our knowledge of reality remains always partial, imperfect, relative, not relativistic, certain up to a certain extent and uncertain up to another. Let us sum up. In this unit, we have seen the four prominent theories of truth and spoken of error as related to and different from truth. The correspondence theory says that truth is the adequation of the mind to the object. In other words, truth is the correspondence itself between what I affirm or deny to what is really the case. Coherence theory of truth interprets truth as coherence between a proposition and other well-established two propositions. If it can be shown that this proposition does not contradict these well-established prepositions, then it can be called true. By pragmatic theory of truth, William James speaks more in terms of meaning or view of life. If an assertion and the view of life, which is thus made up of such assertions, function satisfactorily in my life, if in other words it gives meaning and purpose to my life, then that assertion and view of life are true. Of course they may be true to me and not to you. James applies this also to religious propositions expressive of religious beliefs, and in this he is followed by others more recent thinkers of whom we shall speak later in a related but different context. No matter how perceptual error is to be explained, it is to be noted that if we can speak of perceptual error at all, if we somehow or other can come to detect it and somehow that it is an error, it is because paradoxically enough sense perception is fundamentally reliable. Thank you.